Today on 10 Minute IT Jams, we have Garrett O'Hara, who is the Field Chief Technologist at Mimecast. So welcome to the jam, Garrett.
Great to be here.
Perfect. So we're going to focus primarily on ransomware in today's interview. So we're all aware of what ransomware is and how devastating it can be. But why do you see ransomware as one of the biggest cybersecurity threats of our time in 2021?
Yeah, look, it's fair to say that the pace and the scale of cyber incidents has grown exponentially, certainly over the last couple of years. But ransomware is really right at the front of the pack when it comes to the things that people worry about. Australian statistics from the Mimecast State of Email Security Report in 2021 sort of paint a picture here. And we see that more than 6 out of 10 companies have suffered a ransomware attack last year, and that's up 10% from the year previously. And of about half of those that paid the ransom, you see that only about 3/4 actually recovered their data. So about 1/4 of the organizations don't get their data back despite paying. And then the real worry is that of those that did suffer an attack, the average downtime was 4 days, which is significant. And about 1/4 of those that experienced an attack, it was actually a week or more of downtime. So all of that kind of shows that the threat is certainly growing and the damage from ransomware is growing. And not only in terms of reputational damage, but also in terms of financial and productivity.
Yeah. And one of the biggest sort of talking points with ransomware is the debate whether or not to pay a ransom. So what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. There's been a lot of discussion around mandating reporting of ransomware attacks and sort of payment demands. And in Australia, we've actually got a private members bill that's been submitted that would make that mandatory. So we do believe that there is some requirement for external pressure for businesses to fully acknowledge the risk of ransomware, to take the appropriate steps to protect against it, and to report ransomware and avoid payments. There is an argument that can be made that in the absence of regulation, such as mandatory reporting, a business that's impacted by ransomware will make rightly the fiduciary decisions that represents the best outcome and the best value for its shareholders, but that might not be in the best interests of that organization's supply chain, its customers, or the community at large, because the secrecy around ransomware disclosures, it actually then hides the true extent and the cost of the problem, and actually then limits the greater understanding of the techniques and the people who are the perpetrators of these attacks. So mandatory reporting, if it was implemented, it does need to be done in a way that doesn't also inadvertently push the problem underground and really undermine the intent. So you'd have to look at insurance companies and consulting with those organizations to get clarity on what will and won't be covered if reporting was made mandatory. So for example, if mandatory reporting was introduced, would insurance then cover some or all of things like ransomware payments, remediation, recovery, reputation, and also the ongoing financial damage?
Right. Yeah. And yeah, looking towards the future now, what is next in the battle against ransomware? Like, what's next for ransomware as a whole and for the sort of cybersecurity protection against it?
Yeah, look, awareness and education are hugely important, and I would say also nationally coordinated approaches will become more important. We're seeing some of that start already, and actually also international approaches. But clarity around laws and appropriate actions to take in the event of an attack, I think that still needs focus, and that's evident based on reports of kind of varying speed of the transparency with which organizations act on and report ransomware attacks to their relevant bodies. There is a really recent, probably the last 12 months or so, focus on ransomware in the media and certainly in political discussions, and that needs to morph into clear, actionable regulations that give businesses and public sector organizations very clear guidance on reporting requirements. Because if it's left up to individual organizations, what you'll see is short-term actions, short-focused actions that invariably results in reporting being sometimes non-existent or at times just really painstakingly slow. But you don't then see the real long-term gains that could be made. So on the flip side then, clear parameters, education, and measurements, they'll all drive tangible outcomes.
Yeah. And yeah, human errors are one of the biggest things in sort of cybersecurity prevention. So in your opinion, are employees aware enough of the risks and how to mitigate them, or are they still an extremely weak link in the cybersecurity sort of chain?
You're right. Yeah, they certainly are. Employees are still a weak link, unfortunately, and through no fault of their own. I think that's one thing I think is important in our industry to be clear about. It's not any fault of the employees. People who are financial experts or amazing at HR, we shouldn't expect them to be cybersecurity experts. But we do know that about 90% of incidents do involve human error, and that's the facts, unfortunately. So there really is a great need for better training and awareness of cyber threats and really risks across all workers that have access to the internet, which is pretty much everybody these days. And complicating this more, even more, is the effects of COVID, where people are working remotely, not protected by their organizations and what it's like to be in an office. So that is a consideration also. One of the things we've seen is that the training that is provided is in many cases ineffective, because the lessons that are learned are very quickly forgotten. And the organizations that display best practice when it comes to cyber awareness training, they all share common traits, and that's that they adopt things like continuous learning and reinforcement. That's part of their approach. And they focus on changing security behaviors rather than over focusing on kind of checkbox exercises and compliance. So they're very clearly kind of in the mode of behavior change rather than information transfer. That's a very, very big difference. The Mimecast State of Email Security report in 2021, we saw that about a quarter of companies practice ongoing cyber awareness training, and just under half were delivering training only quarterly or less frequently, which is a little bit of a worry. And that's despite the fact that employee deception is one of the most common attack vectors. I think everybody kind of understands that. And we saw that 69% of respondents in that report had been hit by an attack that was initiated by compromising a user. And then also that 69% believe risky employee behavior is actually putting their company in danger. So, those two numbers should have people thinking. But by far the most common means of compromising employees is via email deception. And we've seen a huge surge of this during the pandemic. About 2/3 of Australian organizations seeing an increase in the volume of email-related attacks, which involve phishing with malicious links or attachments. So, all in all, the statistics like that kind of show that many organizations are actually still lacking when it comes to technology as a defense, but more so the attitudes too, and the type of training being rolled out still needs to change. And when it comes to employees, they're increasingly distracted. They're using way more online communications than ever before. They've got phones with multiple apps beeping and tweeting and blinking to get their attention. And that's kind of a thing we need to consider. The right type of training, it can be absolutely critical in building the fence at the top of the cliff and not relying on the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
All right, brilliant. Well, that's all the questions I had for you today, Garrett. Well, yeah, thanks for joining me today on today's interview.
Great to be here. Thank you.